Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of my Python Basics course on cartoonsmart.com, and my name is Pierre Maddaleni. In the original episode, I told you to install a program called PyCharm to edit and run your Python code along with the Python editor. But I decided to make it easier for people to get started with Python that I should make everything available online. So what I'm using here is something called Replit, repl.it. It is a free website which is dedicated to helping people learn and experience programming. So currently it is March 16th, 2020, and they are currently running a code jam. A code jam is an event which happens over a few hours, a few minutes, or a few days, sometimes even a few months or years, where basically you have an objective to make and you have this time to start and finish making whatever you have to. And I'm going to use this opportunity of making my code jam entry to teach you all some of the basics of Python. So today what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be teaching you some basics of data structures, such as strings, ints, and chars, and inputs like, inputs. There's only one type of input, one main type of input on Python, on how to make some simple text-based applications. So to do this, you're going to want to go to repl.it, and you don't have to make an account for this, but what you can do is I would recommend making an account to save it, and I would check on this. I might have a link down in the description on a course, a little class, quote-unquote class on here, which you can use. I have no guarantee of that actually happening, but basically in the top right corner, you would just hit new REPL, and you select your language. So here you just hit Python, you name it, and you hit create REPL. And to just show you what it looks like if I weren't logged in, I'm just going to go into incognito mode real quick. And this if you go to repl.it, this is the page you would go to. You can sign up, or you can just create a new REPL, select Python, and create it. So if you don't have an account, it won't let you actually name it, but it creates a REPL, and we can just do a quick test. And run it, and it'll automatically run in Python. You don't have to install anything or any of that matter. And sometimes there might be like a package that you need. If there's some sort of Python library, you can search for it. I can't really think of one right now, but like, for example, if we were to want to get requests, which would be for API calls, you would just search for it. You would hit this plus button, and it automatically installs everything for you and also adds all the necessary files over here. So we'll see that it'll install requests. Request is probably not the best example to do because request just comes straight baked in, but it'll also create your poetry.lock and pyproject.toml that you can use, which pretty much sets you up for everything that you need in your Python project. So now I'm going to go back to my Python file, and we're first going to make a little menu. So also in this, I'm going to teach you about classes. So essentially, when you want to create let's say an integer, you would generally go a. So a is going to be the name of our variable, equals some sort of number which is not a decimal. So for here, we're going to do 1. So an integer is some sort of data type. And if we wanted to make sure that it's an integer, we would surround it with int and parentheses and then whatever we want. So whatever we pass to this, it would become an integer. So if I had a equals 0, and then b equals integer of a, b, it'll make sure that b is an integer. So for example, if we had a float up here, which a float or double, that's one with decimal points on the end of it, and there's one can go further into the decimal places than the other. I'm not going to go into very much detail about that, but for these, I'm just going to use float. A float of 0 or 12.34. and then b is going to be the converted integer. So basically when you convert it to an integer, it'll round it. So what we can do is we can print a, I don't know why that happened, and then we can just print b. So we'll be able to see the two values. So see, it printed out the float, which is 12.34, sorry, 12.34, and then it also printed out the converted integer, which rounded it down to 12. If I did something like 12.54, it should round, sorry, never mind. It normally in math it'll round up, but for something like this, you would have to use your math class to make it round up. And I believe what you would do for this is first, when you're using a class like the math class, or sorry, a library like the math library, you want to go over here to packages. You want to search for math. Let me look up the Python library. It should just be math. Okay. I might not have to actually do this. I won't have to actually install this, but let's just see if we can do import math and then run it, and it doesn't give us any errors once it runs. Yeah, if it doesn't give us any errors once you hit import, that means that we already have have it all installed. So to make it round, so to round we would do math dot seal and then whatever value. So I actually need to move this down a little bit. So b would be the integer of rounding up of a. So if we run it, it'll properly round it to 13. This also means that if you have something like 12.14, which you really shouldn't be rounding up, it'll also round it up to 13. Or if, for example, it's a 1.14, it'll round it up to 2. So you would need to use something like an if statement to just make sure that it's at a certain level, whether to do a math seal or just a regular integer conversion. So for that, what I'm first going to do is I'm going to type the words if a, so it's seeing if a is something. So there's a few things we can do here. We can do less than, we can do greater than, we can do equals to, and when you're doing equals, you need to make sure you have two equals, and then there's less than an equal or greater than an equal. Sorry, greater than an equal. So for this one, I'm just going to do if a is less than, let me figure out how to do this. So for this is actually going to be more of a complex if statement that we're doing. So just before we actually put that together, I've decided that I just want to write out what we need to do. So first we want to see if the decimal of a is less than 0.5. So basically anything after the decimal point, I want to see if that's less than 0.5. So there's a few ways we can do this, and I'm going to show you both of the ways now. So the sloppy way and the way that you really shouldn't be doing this is you can cut off the beginning of it until the decimal point. So basically, if you had the number, if you had, like, let's say you had x is equal to 1, 2, 3, and then 0.456, you would cut it off. You use a function to cut it off to make it, it would be a string, so it would be like this. So this is not a number, this is a series of characters, and then you would use something to make it turn into 0.456, and then we would see if whatever this is, if once we turn it into an integer, if that, just copy this, if 0.456 is less than 0.5, which it quite obviously is for us, It's not that simple for a computer. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing something called string indices. So first things first, we're going to turn A into a string. So right now I'm just going to make a temporary variable X. And in reality, when you're actually programming stuff, you should be using words, but as I'm doing basic examples here, I'm just going to be using single letter variables, but later on I will use actual variables so we know what's going on for what variable. So if I ask for somebody's name, I would do a variable like name. But here I'm just going to use X for now. So X is going to be str open parentheses A. So now we're going to get the string of A. And now, so the first thing we have to do is find, we're first going to have to find where the first occurrence of a decimal point is. So we're going to be, so now just an example of an actual thing, we're going to do decimal location equals x dot find open parentheses, and you can do either 2 apostrophes or 2 quotation marks. I personally like using quotation marks. Sometimes I just choose whichever one. It doesn't really matter. X dot find and then a decimal. So which will end us up with this. So if I were to then below this print out decimal location, and let me comment out the rest of this so it doesn't really get into our way with what we're printing out. We should get that we should print out the number 1, because in Python and really any other programming language out there, it starts counting at 0. So this is character 0, that's character 1, that's character 2, and that's character 3, instead of character 1, character 2, character 3, character 4. It's just whatever minus 1. So basically, once we do that, so now what we're going to do is we're going to modify our string. So we're going to do x equals x, open brackets, and then we're going to do decimal location, colon. So what this will do is, once we print out x again, to be the second line, we end up with whatever's after the decimal point. So I can literally, that's not a number, type away a number to my heart's content. Let's just add some more right here, and it will only write what's after the what's after here. So one example, going back to the different decimals, you see that it's the e plus 25. You just need to make sure that your decimal isn't too long, or you're going to run into stuff like that. Sorry, like just keep it short, which you're never going to be using anything of that length. Just make sure that you're using a very short decimal in this example. Now that we have just this, we can turn x back into an integer. So we're going to do x, or a. For now, I'm just going to do a is equal to int of x. And also, on top of that, just to make sure that we don't run into any sort of problems with this, I'm going to turn this into a string. So str, open parentheses, whatever we have inside. And before it, I'm going to add, in quotation marks, number 0, hit plus, and then there we go. This will make it so it turns into 0 point blah 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 blah. So now that we have this, we're going to do our actual if statement. So first we want to see if x is less than 0.5, and then we're going to do a colon. So now it'll automatically add a tab for us, but basically right here is basically what we want to do if it's less than 5. So for now, we just want to round it down. So b will be equal to int of a. So that's just a regular rounding. Now, if you already have an if statement going on and you want to see if another thing is true, we can do elif, which stands for else if. So if the first thing isn't true and you want to see if something else is true, you can do this. If x is greater than or equal to, that's what this is, x is greater than or equal to 0.5, what we can do is b is equal to int math, not int, just int math dot seal of a. And then one last thing else, so if neither of these two things are true, I'm just going to send a little statement out to the terminal. There was an error with the number set as the variable a. Please try again. Now, one thing about strings is that if you set something with these, you can type with these inside of it. So if you see right now, it's turning the stuff, like if I just had this wasn't commented out, you see that all that's changing. If I did print yada yada, if I did hello, please don't do that, it'll mess up and it'll do this, and that'll lead to an error. But if I instead of, yeah, it goes right there, if I use quotation marks right here, I can just use those in there just fine. Apostrophe is just fine. So now, if we run this, it should basically take this little decimal right here, turn it into a string, find where the decimal is, then it'll take only the digits after the decimal, turn it into an integer, and then if it's less than 0.5, b equals int a. Or, oh, sorry, I almost did that. It should be a float. X should become a float. So you run this, it'll round it up or down. So if I change this to whatever 0.5, it rounds it up. But if I change it to 0.4, it rounds it down. So that's how you do it with a string. So there is another way of doing this, but with an integer, and I'm just going to comment all this out. And to do a multi-line comment, you can do 3 apostrophes, and then at the end another 3 apostrophes. When you finish your program, I would not recommend doing these. I would recommend doing a bunch of single-line comments, which single-line comments look like this. And you can do as many of those in a row, and it'll work. So that's what I recommend doing in the end. But to do this properly, it's actually fairly simple. X is just equal to a minus the integer of a. What this will give us is the always rounded down value, which will be, for example, 67831. And so 67831 minus 67831.5 will equal 0.5, which is just this. So now if we run it again, there we go. And just as a little test, let me put it below 0.5, and it rounds it properly. So that is a much better way of doing it. And it only took me 1 line instead of, what was this, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. You could compress this into like fewer lines, but anyways, it would take more data and it would take more time to process. This is always the correct way. Now let's say you wanted to, you didn't want to have to go into your program and change this value every time. That's also very simple. You can create a little function called input, and the input's going to equal I'm actually going to name this input. I'm going to just name this user input, because what we're actually going to be using is the input function, which by default turns yellow as it's a built-in function. So I'm going to ask, please enter a number you would like to round. And always when you're doing something like this, you want to make sure you have a space after your colon. Because if I didn't put a space after my colon, the cursor will go like this, and that doesn't look proper. If I do put the space after my colon, it'll go like this. And now, what we do is, instead of this number right here, we're just going to change this to user input. And whenever you see this number, this menu pop up, you can use the arrow keys to go between them all, and then hit tab, and it'll automatically complete it. It's very useful. And if it gets annoying by like putting a bunch of stuff, you can go into settings, and you can turn off code intelligence, which is what this is called. I like keeping it enabled, but that's just preference. So now, and just as a final polish to our program, I'm going to add just a little bit of touch, just to tell them what they're looking at. So first things first, I'm going to open up my print function. I'm going to say the number which you entered, and then I also just want a little blank line between my two results, and then another print the correct, the rounded version of your number. So once we run this, it'll ask for a number. So we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, and I'm going to hit enter, and the number I entered was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the correctly rounded version was 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So now, and one little final thing, I just want to add one more little space between them, two more spaces between them, just to make it a little bit, just a tiny bit more neat and organized. So now, if we run this one more time, and this time I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, hit enter, it rounds it up to 1, 2, 3, 5, and it makes it nice and little neat. So that's your little introduction on data structures in Python, and using examples with if statements on how to use them properly. Next in our series, I'm going to be working on ways to use an API to communicate with outside services, so you can bring things like analytics and statistics into your program and access the internet and stuff like that. See you then. Thank you for watching.